creativity and art brings us to our senses, brings us into the present moment, into the here and now. Our sense, whichever ones we love the most, our sense of sight or hearing or touch or, even scent or taste, there can all be sources of, information, wonderful information about the world around us. And they are the original source for us of our ways of knowing and navigating the world. So coming back to our senses through creativity, it's not, creativity in that way isn't seen as an escape from reality. It can actually be a reality check.
Welcome to Leading Notes, where I talk with musicians who are leading the revitalisation of social health in our communities. I'm your host, Melissa Forbes. Today's guest is Dr Carla van Laar, a creative and experiential therapist, painter and passionate advocate for the creative revolution in mental health and wellbeing. With over 30 years' experience using the arts for health and wellbeing in community organisations, justice, health and education settings, Carla is the founding director of the Creative Mental Health Forum and convener of Psychotherapy and Counselling Federation of Australia's College of Creative and Experiential Therapies. She currently lives and works on Boonwurrung country in Inverloch, where she runs a welcoming art studio and creative therapies practice, working with NDIS participants, war veterans and families affected by violence. Carla's work is grounded in philosophy that arts-based practices are essential for healing our troubled world. She has authored 2 books, including Seeing Her Stories, which explores making women's unseen stories visible through art. Known for her work in community arts initiatives like the Inverloch Pop-Up Art Co., Carla insists on being part of a creative revolution where art re-embodies lived experience, brings us to our senses, and serves as an agent of social change. I'm particularly excited to talk to Carla today as the first visual artist to be featured on the podcast. Carla van Laar, welcome to Leading Notes.
Thank you very much, Melissa. I loved the way that you did that intro. It was very enticing.
Thank you. Well, it is very enticing, and that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you today. Why do we need to be brought back to our senses? And how can creativity help us to do this, Carla?
Okay. That's a really big and probably quite a philosophical question. I could give really rambling answers, so just pull me up if I do. Essentially, I like to convey that creativity itself can and does restore our trust in first-hand experiencing in a world that keeps asking us to outsource our sense of reality. So that's let me unpack that idea a little bit. So I've been thinking about it just this morning in thinking about our chat, actually, and the metaphor of maybe a gaslighting boss came to me. So if we're probably all or many of us have had the experience of working for a gaslighting boss, so somebody who we're dependent on for our livelihood, and maybe grateful to in that way, but also who maybe sometimes undermines us and our sense of what's going on. So little comments like, I didn't mean to be sexist or racist or homophobic or any of those things. I didn't mean to do that. You're overreacting, or you're being too sensitive, or I don't want to do this to you, but it's, the higher ups who are telling me I have to, or, just these kinds of things that undermine our own perception of what's really going on.
Yeah.
So in some ways, the society that we live in, although we're really interdependent beings and we're reliant on it in so many ways, there's lots of ways in which the systems that we've inherited in our society also set us up to maybe question our own perception of reality. And so we're often relying on information given to us through second or third or fourth hand sources. There's advertising everywhere that in one way or another tells us that we're not quite good enough, that we need to be different or buy something more to, be better. And then there's also, of course, our health system, which is based on the biomedical model. That itself was probably born out of the mind-body split, and in which we're not cast as experts in our own health and well-being, but we're encouraged to consult experts who'll tell us and treat us. Yeah. So creativity itself, and for anyone who's interested in my book, Seeing Her Stories, this is one of the chapters about my findings. And the finding, I was asking the question, what can happen when a woman's stories are seen through art as opposed to remaining visible? And one of the very first findings was that creativity and art brings us to our senses, brings us into the present moment, into the here and now. Our sense, whichever ones we love the most, our sense of sight or hearing or touch or, even scent or taste, there can all be sources of, information, wonderful information about the world around us. And they are the original source for us of our ways of knowing and navigating the world. So coming back to our senses through creativity, it's not, creativity in that way isn't seen as an escape from reality. It can actually be a reality check.
Yeah, I think countering that messaging is just such a huge challenge, isn't it? Because it's not just a recent thing. This is something that's been happening for decades.
Decades and millennia. So, look at all of the cultural practices of the oldest traditions and cultures around the world, and especially here, in Australia. There's ancient cultural practices that traditionally support community life and health and well-being, and that in fact, weren't ever separated from health and well-being, but as we know, like social and emotional health were privileged or more important than mental health or physical health, if you like.
Yes, yeah.
And there's also all of the beautiful research around at the moment, people looking into creative flow states and the benefits. So, there's, the engaging in a creative practice of any form really brings us into the here and now. We have to be present because that's where it's happening, right here, right now, into our senses, so into our own ways of knowing, the world. And then if we continue that for as little as 20 minutes, then we can experience this creative flow state that, is really calming for us and relaxing. It's like time expands but stands still at the same time. And we're completely absorbed in what we're doing. And there's no disconnect between thought and action. It's flow. And that's really good for us in so many ways, including that we'll sleep better, we'll be less stressed, we'll meet challenges in our lives better. And that's through creative practice. Amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you, in your practice, I've just written up a research paper about some of the things that you've just been talking about. And while singing is highly conducive to flow, not all people experience flow when they sing. So we can't kind of state if you do singing or if you paint, you will be in a flow state, right? Like there are a whole bunch of other things that kind of need to align for that to occur.
Yeah.
In your practice, if you're encountering someone who is kind of really overthinking or kind of judging what they're doing, what do you do to try to draw them into the present moment?
Yeah, I run a group every second Sunday called the Supervision Studio. It's for therapists, but we use creative methods for reflective practice. And I always make sure there's half an hour for people to engage in their own making time, right? And I introduce it by saying, yes, it's half an hour. That gives us time to get into our creative flow, or to enough time to bump up against those obstacles that might be there, like our inner critic, our self-judgment, our attachment to the product rather than the process, our frustration with materials, all sorts of things. So preempting that is part of, helping people to navigate through it and encouraging people to be non-judgmental about those obstacles to creativity when they pop up, because, they can often reveal things that might be really important for us to unpack further, or might give us really important information about our preferences, and to go, okay, well, that's actually not right for me, and be adaptable and go, I'm going to try another way. Or so perseverance, flexibility, adaptation, happy accidents, all of those kinds of things that can happen when we find a way in or around despite the obstacles.
So whatever happens, there's an opportunity to gather more information and learn something.
Yeah. Self-awareness.
Tell me how you came to be doing the work that you're doing, Carla. What was your journey into this space?
Many pathways that probably converged. I was reflecting on this one as well. So, like many people, I think, who work with others through creativity. So I'm a creative arts therapist. I worked in my early years. Actually, I studied fine arts painting at uni, and I got into doing community arts practice through that. So I worked with people in community arts projects and settings, and then found my way into creative arts therapy. And I've never really lost my fine arts and community arts practice roots, if you like. But even earlier than that, I was reflecting on my very early primary school years. And I had a little friend in about grade 1 or 2, a little friend called Peter, and her mum was an artist, and Peter's mum would come in and run a little art group for kids like me who really loved art. And I still distinctly remember the first time I was introduced to the idea of perspective. When you look down a long road and the lines of the road converge at the horizon, that idea of perspective. And it changed how I looked at the world around me, even when I was 6 or 7, and I took up sketching as a hobby. And that's an example, I guess, of what I was mentioning earlier, how creative practice in whatever art form we choose or that we're drawn to can bring us to our senses, and become a worldview, if you like. So for me, even as a young child, being raised in contexts where there was shadows and secrets, and I was feeling that things, were not as they seemed, like in a kind of a Truman-like sense, that I could come back to my drawing practice and make sense of the world through my own lenses. So that was something very early on that I think is a thread that's woven through my whole life, and through those, all of the cumulative experiences of wounds and losses in my life, and creativity as a source for navigating through life. And so that's sort of at the core of what brought me to this work.
What a profound experience to have as a young child, to have creative practice change your perspective on the world. Isn't that incredible? Have you ever had a chance to tell Peter's mum about the impact that she had?
No, I don't think I have.
Yeah.
Hi, Peter. Hi, Peter.
Yeah. If you're listening.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. If we talked a little bit about your practice, but you work very much at the kind of systems level as well. And I'm really interested in the work that you're doing, advocating at that national level for recognition of creative arts therapies within our mental health system. Tell me about some of the work you're doing there.
At the moment, that work is, it's being expressed. My passion for advocacy is being expressed through my role as the convener of PACFA's College of Creative and Experiential Therapies. I've got a pretty long history of advocating for our profession. So it was during the time when I was studying my master's degree that a group of myself and our fellow students were studying a Master of Creative Arts Therapy at RMIT University in Melbourne. And we founded an association, a professional association for ourselves to become part of called ACATA, the Australian Creative Arts Therapy Association. And I was the founding president of that in 1999. So that's, my advocacy work has spanned decades. And that's why I said it's finding its expression these days, or as the convener of Seek It, we call it. So maybe about, it was in 2020 that a group of my creative arts therapy colleagues and myself were pretty highly attuned, as many people were, to the growing mental health epidemic in Australia. And that was during COVID times. It became really apparent to everyone that the Australia's mental health service system was in desperate need of reform in order to better service the community. And so we could see the systems gearing up slowly for that response and change. And we wanted to really ensure that our profession and our colleagues and the communities that we serve were part of the changes that we could feel were needed and imminent. And so I'd already become a registered clinical counsellor with PACFA as a creative arts therapist, because PACFA recognise creative arts therapies as an approach under the larger umbrella of psychotherapy and counselling. Okay. So that broad view of psychotherapy and counselling enabled myself and other creative arts therapists, including music therapists, to become registered with PACFA. And then a group of about 50 of us worked together to form an official division within PACFA, which is the College of Creative and Experiential Therapies. And we named it that also to have quite a broad name. So it's focused on practitioners like myself who, I am a visual artist, but I work intermodally or multimodally, including experiential practices like mindfulness and embodiment and drama and things like that, along with visual arts practices. And there's more and more creative therapists working in those intermodal, creative and experiential ways. So that's why we called the college Creative and Experiential Therapies. And I guess to answer your question, positioning ourselves that way under the broader umbrella of PACFA has meant that we're able to be recognised and part of the bigger systemic structural changes that PACFA are part of through their advocacy for the profession of psychotherapy and counselling. So if without our presence within PACFA, we might still be sidelined, but because we're in there, we're now included in national reforms such as the recently released just last year, the new national standards for the psychotherapy and counselling workforce.
Right.
Yeah, so those national standards are intended to help mainstream our services within the public health system. And so being included within that reform, our intention is to be part of that mainstreaming, so to become more included and embedded in public health responses. Yeah, and so ultimately to enable more members of our community to have better access to creative and experiential therapeutic supports and services.
Some really long-term kind of strategic thinking there around how you position the work that you've been doing. Do you find, this might be a bit of a political question, but do you find within PACFA that there's an acceptance of creative arts therapies within that more traditional umbrella?
We've felt really embraced and supported by PACFA. So, yeah, we've been welcomed and supported really well. We were supported to create a dedicated college. We've been supported in all of the work of the college. So we run a monthly online professional development series, for example, that's resourced by PACFA. We're resourced to also offer monthly networking events. And what we've found is that when we're offering a professional development training workshop online, that it's not just the creative and experiential therapy community who attend, but it's the broader PACFA community who are also really interested in learning more about these ways of working. So,
The reason that I'm speaking to you today is actually because of something that you posted on LinkedIn a while ago. And the point that you were making was that, we've got a mountain of evidence about, recognising creative engagement as really important to mental health, on a par with other really important things like sleep and diet and exercise.
yeah.
However, we are still in a situation, particularly in this country, where things like creative arts therapies are seen as on the periphery. What's creating the disconnect here between the evidence that we have that these types of therapies are highly effective and broader implementation?
Different people will have different answers to that, I'm sure. From a governance perspective, and I probably mean the government, they'll talk about being concerned for safety and return on investment. Okay, so like you've just said, and I've also been saying, the question, does it work, is now outdated. There's the World Health Organization and other leading global and international health organizations have plenty of evidence that they've generated and collected and published about the benefits of creativity in all its forms. Okay. So we know, as you said, that, and even in here in Victoria, Vic Health have been advocating for creative engagement. Creative Australia advocate for creative engagement for communities. We know that it helps to support health and wellbeing in so many different ways. It completely addresses, one of the major underlying problems of mental unwellness and ill health, which is isolation and loneliness. Engaging creativity and the arts is connecting, essentially. It helps build community and it helps connect people to one another and to parts of themselves that otherwise may not be expressed. And so it addresses isolation and loneliness, which can be underlying lots of different mental health issues, especially depression. Okay. So there's that. And then there's all of the other benefits like the developing self-awareness, strengthening and deepening relationships, giving voice to stories that might have been invisible, of all sorts of untold stories in the lives of our communities, and the calming, stress relieving benefits that many of us really need in the lives that we live. So there's all of these benefits. Then, of course, there's more research coming out now about the return on investment. We can't just look at engagement or uptake as I guess evidence of efficacy or usefulness, and we can't just look, like many arts organizations may have, we can't just look at the income producing aspects, right? So we can't look at the benefits of arts as how much money they make. It has to be by looking at how they relieve the burden on other parts of the system. Yeah, so how having accessible community-based arts initiatives and access to creative therapies, how that relieves the burden on the mental health service system, how it relieves the burden on the public health system, how it reduces hospital admissions, how it reduces suicides. These are the returns on investment that we need to be
Mm-hmm.
looking at. Why are we still slow to implement these things? Probably because systems do move slowly. We know that we've got dominant models in the health services, the biomedical model. They don't quite know probably how to value what we have to offer. And that's why I mentioned the return on investment. So scientific and biomedical approaches to measuring outcomes don't really fit with the way that we work. There's lots of reasons for that. And some of the reasons are that what we do is relational, and in each context, we're responding to the unique people and circumstances and contexts that we're in. So they're not one size fits all approaches, and they're certainly not replicable approaches that you can just prescribe in a different setting. Yeah, so it's very hard to generalize, and it's very hard to do things like a random controlled trial or some of those other methods that are really valued in a biomedical model. So we need to be looking differently at the evidence of how we value this kind of work. And then we have to look at the systems that we build to support them and make them accessible. So, for example, offering people 1 hour of creative therapy a week is a biomedical model that's been layered over the top of a creative therapy. And to me, that doesn't really make much sense. That's 1 hour a week where we could be resourcing creative health community hubs that are homes for the arts, where people can go in and engage in lots of different ways, spend time with each other, be surrounded by arts and arts practice, be audiences, be participants, be connected, way more outside of just 1 hour a week.
Yeah, so, some really different ways of thinking required there at the systemic level. I have an interesting question for you. I wrote a paper with a GP about music on prescription.
Oh, yeah.
And part of what he wrote about was the fact that patients often don't take this kind of thing seriously. And I'd never actually thought about that, right? I'm always thinking, the problem is at the systems level, trying to convince with evidence, and it's hard to get the evidence, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
But then, he raised the point that a lot of people, if a GP prescribed them creative arts therapy or go and join a choir, they would think, well, you're just a quack, because there's probably, I think it's fair to say, a general lack of understanding of the benefits of the types of things that we're talking about in the general population.
Yes.
And then to add to that, I recently presented at a Parkinson's disease symposium, and the headliner was, the top-notch neurosurgeon from Brisbane who gave this amazing presentation.
Yeah.
And then I got up and got everybody singing. And just in kind of picking up on the vibe in the room, they enjoyed the singing and all the rest of it, but it was really clear that they thought that the neurosurgeon had all the answers.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And even in the feedback from the people who attended, it was very much, it was great to hear from Dr. So-and-so and, all of that. And so that's, again, kind of made me realise that there's actually a lot of work to be done just in raising the general population's awareness of the benefits of engaging in the arts because of the predominance of the biomedical model, and the kind of unwavering belief that people have in that model.
Yeah.
To introduce things like this is still, I think, quite radical for a lot of people.
Yeah. I can completely relate to that. I guess that's what I was getting at earlier about our indoctrination, the inherited systems that we live within that many of us, have internalized because that's what we've been brought up in since birth. And it it can require a shift in worldview, and that's not an easy task. It's not an easy thing to ask of people either. And it, in some ways, putting the responsibility for our health and well-being into the hands of experts externalizes it and places it outside of ourselves, and enables us to keep deferring our power to others, which, can be quite a comfortable position if we're used to doing that. So, yeah, and I think that when you said awareness raising, that's really the key. And I mean, I've worked recently, I've worked all across my career with people who were resistant to working with me. Like, I've worked in prisons, and
Yeah.
I've worked recently with veterans who aged in a group. They were people aged 60 to 85, and was the oldest member of the group. Was really funny. At the end of a 12-month program, he actually created an artwork to show his journey. And at the start, he had himself there with a little bubble saying, "What's this mumbo jumbo?" Right. And then at the end of the year, he was like, "Wow, this creative stuff is good. It actually helps me." So, that's actually pretty quick change for an
Yeah.
85-year-old over just
Yeah.
1 year. But it's that old saying, like, tell me and I may remember. Oh, no, hang on. Tell me and I'll forget. Show me and I might remember, but involve me and I'll understand. So I think that when people experience for themselves the benefit, then that's the best evidence that a person can have, is knowing that it's good for them.
Yeah.
Mm.
I completely agree with that. And I think that trying to persuade people with evidence, rational arguments, and all the rest of it is very, very difficult unless they have the experience, the embodied experience that we're talking about. I feel that that's pretty much, for a lot of people, the only way they're going to understand what it is that we are talking about. And even if they then can't articulate what that experience was like, they know that they've had that experience. There's something that stays with them from that. And to me, I'm a very strong advocate of that as well.
Mm.
That having, and I extend that not just to the average person on the street, but to policymakers, the people who are holding the purse strings. I feel like they need to have that experience as well.
Yeah. The really interesting and really necessary conversations is, how do we convey the value, and how do we bring people on board, not just policymakers, but people who can benefit.
Right.
And even that question of evidence, like in my role as the convener of CCIT, I work closely with Deputy Convener Tara Harridan. She's an Aboriginal Australian woman. She belongs to Wiradjuri mob. And together we've got a good relationship also with Bianca, who's the convener of PACFA's College of Indigenous Healing Practices. And we get together and have conversations about the way that we work. And it's listening to Bianca and Tara, who are consistently saying to me, well, look at our evidence. It's the evidence of continuing practice over millennia. Right? It's the evidence that these things persist and continue, and people keep doing them because people for that long have known that they work. And that's a different view of evidence.
Yeah, I love that view though. It's very compelling to me, that's for sure. You told the story just before about the 85-year-old veteran who had a change of heart, shall we say, or kind of really started to understand how he could benefit. Can you share another story of transformation or something that kind of shows what we're missing if we don't include this type of therapy or experience in our mental health system?
Well, I thought about this one quite a bit, but I thought I would share a little bit of the story about this pop-up, the envelope pop-up art code that you mentioned
Yeah,
earlier.
yeah.
And it still exists as an entity. It doesn't always have a physical place, but a couple of years ago, there was a big building in my small town that was empty across the busy season of summer. So I live in a coastal town, and it was an old accountant's office that they'd moved out of. And I saw it there, and I saw this empty space in the peak time, and I was like, that doesn't make sense. So I approached the real estate agent and said, could I just do a pop up in there instead of it being empty across summer? And could I turn it into an art space? And so that's how it started. So I took over the building for 8 weeks. That was all it was. And I went in there and cleaned it out first of all, and then started painting the walls. They were all painted in strange shades of dark blue and pucey pink. So I started painting the walls white. And as soon as I started painting the walls, preparing them to display art, people started popping in. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Curious. And that evolved into a couple of the people from the veterans group came in and started helping me paint the walls. And then word started getting around, and artists started literally walking through the door, bringing in their artwork. People I'd never met who live in my community, who I didn't
Wow.
even know were artists,
Yeah.
bringing their work in, saying, could I hang some in here too? And so what started off as I thought it was going to be me and two of my friends who are artists hanging our work in there. By the end of the 8 weeks, there was 30 artists involved, all from our local region. And not only that, they would bring their family and friends in to visit their art. And then we started having facilitators because there was a space there. So people would come and ask me if they could offer a group. So we had juggling workshops, learn the ukulele workshops, singing for joy workshops, meditation workshops, sip and paint, life drawing. We had all of these workshops happening in there as well. And it really did become a thriving, creative little hub. So that example is exactly what I was talking about before, because it wasn't sustainable for me as an individual to keep paying the rent, which was significant, and trying to actually generate enough money to keep it going, because the purpose of it was really to be a community resource more than to be a money-making business.
Yep.
Right. So it wasn't sustainable for me to keep running it in that way, although the community loved it and definitely benefited. Okay. And we had a local traditional owner who took up residence in one of the studio spaces there, and people would wander in off the street to yarn with her and learn about the local culture as well as her work. And, there was really beautiful things that happened in there. Now, that is not there anymore. So that's what's missing. Now the fact that we had it and now it's not there, I know what's missing. So at the moment, we've also got a local building in another neighbouring town that's unused. It's an old TAFE building, and a group of local artists are, working really hard to try and establish a community hub there. So what I imagine, I'll just throw this out and see if you can all imagine it too, but I think that we can probably all relate and probably know people who've gone to see a GP when they're in crisis, not early, when they're in crisis, and they've come out with a mental health care plan and told that they can contact a psychologist and go on a waiting list for 6 to 12 months. Now, this might be triggering for some people. I apologise, because I think we really do all know people who've had this happen, and it has really dire consequences. So imagine instead if in that GP clinic, knowing that there was such a long waiting list for psychologists, what if there was a person there who took that help seeker and actually literally walked across the road to a community creative hub and introduced them to a couple of people there, people who were happy to sit and chat and have a cup of tea, or engage them in one of the creative workshops that's happening, or just have a yarn with them. So what if that was what happened to them, instead of them going out with a mental health care plan that they couldn't do anything with for 12 months? That's what we're missing.
Yeah. an incredibly simple, in a way, solution to what is a very, very serious issue, and one that seems to be so easy to implement, and not it doesn't have to be expensive either. But yeah, I do encourage everyone who's listening to imagine, like you said, imagine what that would actually look like and the gap that would fill in that infrastructure that we currently have. We're reaching the end of our time together, but I like to ask everybody that I talk with the same questions as we wrap up. And so the first one I want to ask you is, what's the most important lesson about human connection that your work has taught you?
Connection is the most important thing. We need connection, and in fact, us, like every other living thing, we gravitate towards connection. So we look out into nature, into the living world. It's not only that everything is connected, everything wants to be connected. We're no different. We need connection to thrive.
If you had to choose one song to bring a group of randoms together, what would you pick and why?
This is a funny question because I actually did this not so long ago.
Well, then it's easy for you.
At the Creative Mental Health Forum, we had an opening night, and I'm going to cheat because I worked with a girlfriend who's a creative arts therapist and musician, Brodie Capone. You might have heard of her from the band Brodie Loves, which is fabulous over in WA. But we worked together and she created a medley. But it was made of 3 songs, and they were Bob Marley's One Love, Burt Bacharach's What the World Needs Now, and the Beatles' Love, Love, Love. So
pick the theme.
Them all together. But yeah, I think I'd choose Bob Marley's One Love if I had to choose one.
And finally, what would you want to achieve with one wave of your magic wand?
I would wave my magic wand and boom, inside or beside and alongside and co-located with every GP practice, library, community hub, there would be a community creative hub like the one I just described to you and there would be one for every member of Australia's communities. There would be one that's accessible, as in not just one in the centre of the country, but one in every community.
Yeah, what a wonderful vision. Carla, thank you so much for making art that matters and for being my guest today on Leading Notes.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been a real delight.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make sure to leave a review. I acknowledge that this podcast is produced on the lands of the Gayabal and Jarawar peoples of the Toowoomba region, and I pay my respect to all elders. Mark Schultes produced the original music for this podcast. Thanks for listening. Now go make music that matters.